Chapter 2, First Impressions. Simon Hayes leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen thoughtfully against his notebook. The conference room was abuzz with activity as his new colleagues discussed project timelines and marketing strategies, but Simon's thoughts were elsewhere. Specifically, they were on the woman who had just commanded the room with such effortless authority, Grace Thompson. He'd heard stories about her before he even stepped foot into the building. The office queen, some called her. Others, more reverent, referred to her simply as Ms. Thompson. She was known for her no-nonsense attitude, her sharp intellect, and her unwavering commitment to excellence. But none of the stories had prepared him for actually meeting her. When she walked into the room, it was as if the air shifted, thickening with an unspoken tension. Every eye was on her, every conversation ceased. She didn't demand respect, it was simply given. Simon had encountered confident women before, but Grace was different. She was magnetic, compelling in a way that went beyond her professional demeanor. And then there was that moment when their eyes met, brief, but enough to send a current of something unfamiliar through him. He hadn't expected that. Simon snapped back to the present as the meeting began to wind down. Grace was wrapping up the discussion, her voice cool and controlled, leaving no room for doubt or hesitation. He could see why people followed her lead so willingly. She was the kind of person who made you want to rise to the occasion, to meet the high standards she set. As the team began to disperse, Simon knew he had to make his move. He wasn't one to shy away from introductions, especially when he was genuinely eager to learn from someone like Grace. Standing up, he made his way over to her, rehearsing a casual introduction in his head. But the moment he stood in front of her, all his preparation seemed inadequate. "Ms. Thompson," he began, extending his hand, "I just wanted to say how excited I am to be working under your leadership. I've heard a lot about you, and I'm looking forward to learning from the best." He wasn't sure what he expected, a polite smile, a nod of acknowledgement, maybe even a hint of disinterest. But when she took his hand, something passed between them, a spark, a connection that made his heart beat a little faster. Her touch was firm, her skin warm against his, and for a fleeting moment, the air between them felt charged. Grace looked him in the eye, and Simon was struck by the intensity of her gaze. Those green eyes were sharp, assessing, as if she were trying to read him, to figure out what kind of man he was. He held her gaze, refusing to be intimidated, and then it happened, just the slightest flicker of something softer, something that made his pulse quicken. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice steady, betraying nothing of what he thought he saw in her eyes. "I'm sure you'll find plenty of opportunities to grow here. Welcome to the team." She released his hand, and just like that, the moment was over. Simon smiled, trying to mask the effect she had on him. "Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I won't let you down." As he left the conference room, Simon couldn't help but replay the interaction in his mind. There was something about her, something beyond her reputation, beyond her role as his superior. It was as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, but did so with such grace and composure that you'd never guess how heavy that burden was. He knew he shouldn't be thinking about her like this. She was his boss, and there was a 15-year age difference between them. But there was something undeniably intriguing about Grace Thompson, something that made him want to understand her, to know the woman behind the polished exterior. Back at his desk, Simon tried to refocus on his work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Grace. The way she moved with such purpose, the way she seemed to hold everyone at arm's length, yet commanded such loyalty and respect, it all fascinated him. He remembered the stories he'd heard from his colleagues, how she was strict, tough, and uncompromising. But Simon suspected there was more to her than that. Beneath the surface, behind the cool, professional facade, he sensed something else, something softer, more vulnerable. But he knew better than to dwell on it. He was here to work, to learn, to prove himself in a competitive industry. Whatever he felt, whether it was curiosity, admiration, or something more, he needed to keep it in check. Still, as the day wore on and he settled into his new role, Simon couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Grace had been significant. There was something about her that drew him in, something that made him want to know more. but for now, he would keep his thoughts to himself. After all, it was only his first day. There would be time to figure out what this all meant, if it meant anything at all. Click follow for the next chapters.